Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us again, whether that be Idaho, Minnesota, Florida, California, wherever it is, we just want to say welcome and thank you for journeying with us. And so, every single week we come together and we offer something I would argue is pretty special. Um, we bring something that we spend hours and hours of time on. And so every week we want to bring you a responsibly researched, responsibly thought through understanding of Torah. And so Torah being Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And so what we do is we delve into all of the different rabbinical interpretations from the past. And we look at what the words meant, who the audience was, who the author was. We look at all of this. And so we pour hours of study into this so that every week we can offer you something that we would call really responsible reading. And so after we've taken the time to really research, study, understand, then we begin to find an application. And so every single week we come together, and that's what we do here at Ethos. And so welcome to this study. Again, we are moving through the book of Genesis. And so before we delve in, though, every couple weeks I get these questions, and sometimes I'll let them sit longer than others. Every once in a while, I'll kind of toy with it in the podcast Faith Undone. This one I thought was kind of fun because I did a podcast recently. If you want to listen to that one, you can find it on TonyWerfel.com. But this one was a really fun one. And I've kind of moved through it a little bit. And so I've got an answer for you for it. And again, I appreciate anytime you have questions, anytime you want to dialogue over a concept, shoot those messages in. Ask those questions. Again, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I oftentimes will research it, study it, or maybe I have gone through this experience and I might have something to share and just maybe even start the conversation going. So the question this week, or a couple weeks ago, was this. Now that you've shifted in theology, now that I've shifted in my theology, I find it's harder and harder to listen to Christian music because of its constant focus on Jesus dying to satisfy God. What do you do with music now? And so I responded to this kind of through my last podcast, but I wanted to delve a little bit in this with you at Ethos. And so it is tricky, isn't it? For many of us, we will go to a church service, and what you'll find is most of them have that same kind of tradition, right? You go in, there's a meet and greet, people connect, then you sit down, or you stand, whatever, dependent on your service. And what'll happen is oftentimes the band, the piano music, whatever it is, it'll start playing, which is an invitation for you to stand or to begin to sing along. And so what I've noticed is a lot of the praise songs will oftentimes have narratives that I just don't believe anymore. They'll have doctrines that I may have outgrown. And so like you who've written this, I think it's so interesting. You asked this question because obviously you have outgrown some things too. And so for you, and for me as well, and for many of my friends out there, you've brought this up. This idea of Jesus dying on the cross to satisfy God, this is one that you see over and over again in many, many praise songs, right? Or hymnal songs, right? The wrath of God was satisfied, right? And we have all of these different phrases about essentially Jesus dying on the cross to satisfy angry Father's wrath, his need for blood. When I hear these praise songs, like you, I cringe. And so periodically I'll attend a church and I'll hear these songs and I kind of just, right? You kind of curl up inside, some of us. And so one of the things for me, what do I do with music now? If I'm being totally honest, I don't typically listen to the Christian station anymore because so much of it is filled with music that I just don't connect with. So much of it is filled with these doctrines that I just don't find meaningful anymore. And so what I will do often is most of the time I'll create a playlist, right? on Spotify, YouTube, whatever it is. I'll create that playlist of some of my favorite songs that bring meaning. And so that could be a Neil Diamond song. That could be a hip hop song. It could potentially be a Christian song that I find connection to that doesn't have all of the penal atonement kind of ideas. I look for meaning first, right? I don't necessarily look at the label anymore. That is not interesting to me. You can slap the label Christian, pop, hip hop, whatever label you want on it. But the truth is, if you don't take time to really read over the lyrics, read over the content of the song first, it's just going to be rhythm. It's going to be a beat, or you're just going to be repeating the same doctrine you may have already outgrown, right? So I always look for meaning first. And then, of course, I, as a literature person, I studied literature as well as theology. I will look for poetic depth. I think there is a lot of treble out there, right? We have these interesting melodies, right? And they're all kind of poppy and fun. And but when you stop and you really dissect a piece, does it have depth, or is it just a lot of sugar? Is it just a lot of treble and no bass? I'm looking for the bass notes lately, right? I'm looking for the songs that have something meaningful to say about being a human being, about learning to conquer fear, learning to live better, fuller, richer lives. I'm looking for songs I might have a connection with that day. Maybe I'm feeling frustrated and I need to hear this certain group sing about how angry they are that day and how they're moving through it. I'm looking for the depth. I'm also learning that, like, most Christian songs, at least praise songs, they're extremely repetitious. And so oftentimes really good music doesn't depend on just a repetition to kind of hypnotize you into singing it, right? Bigger narratives like love, forgiveness, loss, I'm looking for those over the repetitiousness of a song, right? I'm looking for rich, deep, poetic pieces that are going to really connect with my humanity and bring me to a place where I'm going to feel fuller and more alive. That could be a Neil Diamond song, like I said, a Bob Dylan song, Wallflowers, or it could be a Chris Tomlin song. But I'm no longer looking at, is it a Christian song or is it a secular song? I'm looking at the lyrics. I'm looking at the depth of the song. I'm looking for ethereal intent. That's what I look for now in my music. And because of it, I would argue I am getting a better, fuller experience from it. And so what do you do with the music? Man, if I'm in a church and the music comes on, oftentimes I'll just close my eyes. I'll listen for something that connects. I might enjoy a couple lines here and there. I might even look up and enjoy the music playing. Right? There are ways to move through it without being the guy that has to be the jerk in the back saying, that's not true, whatever it is. I'm learning to just find ways to enjoy it if I'm there without having to accept certain doctrines that are being done, right? So there are different ways to maturely deal with it. But if I'm in my car, I'll create playlists that I know these songs are so rich, so beautiful, so much depth. That's what I personally do when I come through it. So that's my answer. I hope you liked it. I do delve into the idea of praise and worship music a lot more in the last podcast I did on Faith Undone. I think it's 162 or 163. You'll see it. Wooing Jesus is the name of it. But we go into depth a little more about praise and worship music. So everyone, thank you so much for moving through that question with us today. That was fun. So let's delve into Genesis. So again, Genesis. We have spent over a year and a half going line by line, verse by verse. We have found so much beauty, so much depth. Today it's going to be a little bit shorter because we have a section that typically, again, is kind of skipped over because we're trying to get to the wrestling theme. But there are a couple really interesting, beautiful bass notes I want to hit today. And so reminder, Genesis, not a history book, right? Genesis is written or compiled in 587 BC. When the Babylonians are essentially taking over all of these tiny tribes, and Israel is one of them. And so for them, again, the question is, will they assimilate? Will they take on the other gods of Babylon, or will they hold true to their monotheistic view, their God, their rituals, their traditions? And so again, Torah is a written response to the fears of assimilation. It is not a history book to give us perfect dates, literal names and times in which they lived and all of this. It goes far deeper than that. These are the rich stories, the traditions that tell them about Israel and how their God and their tribe has moved through the ages, in which they have held on to what it means to be a Hebrew. That's the idea. So whenever the Torah is brought out, rich celebration, right? They see themselves in the story. So again, whenever I read through this beautiful piece, I am asking myself, where did Israel see themselves? And once I do that, once I can identify where Israel is in the story, then I can identify where you and I are in the story. Only then, that's the responsible way to view Scripture. So let's move through the section we're going to do today. It's not a super long one, but if we did the whole thing together, it'd be an hour and a half. So we're going to move through just this section. Next week, we'll delve into Jacob wrestling with God. Today, though, chapter 32, verses 15 through 24. And so, reminder again, Jacob and Esau, they are larger pictures of Israel, right? They are the higher self and the lower self of who Israel is. So again, bigger symbol, the twins are really the beautiful light and the darkness that the Jews embody day to day. Whichever side we feed is the side that will either waste the blessing of life or multiply it. That comes from one of my favorite rabbis interpreting this piece. So let's move into the story here. So verse 15, 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams. Again, reminder, this is where we are. Jacob is, he's going out. He knows he's going to run into Esau. Esau is coming toward him. Is there going to be a fight? Is there going to be violence? What's going to happen? Jacob decides to send out some gifts. So 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 nursing camels with their young, 40 cows, 10 bulls, and a partridge in a pear tree, 20 she-donkeys and 10 he-donkeys. And he gave into the hands of his servants each herd individually. And he said to his servants, "Pass on ahead of me and make a space between one herd and another herd." And he commanded the first one, saying, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, 'To whom do you belong? And where are you going? And for whom are these before you?' You shall say, 'I belong to your servant Jacob. It is a gift sent to my master, to Esau. And behold, he himself is behind us.' And he commanded also that the second one, also the third one, and also those who followed the herd, saying, 'In this manner shall you speak to Esau when you meet him.'" So he's basically breaking up his tribe, right? Breaking them up into sections. "And you shall say also, 'Behold, your servant Jacob is behind. For he said, I will appease his anger with the gift that is going before me. And afterwards I will see his face. Perhaps he will favor me.' So the gift passed on before him, and he lodged that night at the camp. And he arose during that night, and he took his 2 wives and his 2 maidservants and his 11 children, and he crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And then he took them out and brought them across the stream, and he took across what was his." Now, most people, when they read this, there's not much there, right? This is often one that a pastor would kind of skip over, get to the meat of it. But there are a couple points I think are worthy of our time today. So watch here in verses 15 and 16. All these goats, all these donkeys, it's a list, right? It's a list. Jacob has, he has a lot, right? He has been given so much blessing. That's the idea. He leaves Laban, and as he leaves, there is this enormous amount of wealth that he's attained, right? And so I know the list seems boring, but it really has a really powerful statement about resilience. So many of you are going to recognize this picture, right? We grew up with this, many of us. This is Cinderella, right? It's the Cinderella experience. Even though her world is like nothing but cleaning and answering her captives, her sisters, her mom, she finds a way to thrive. It's one of my favorite parts of the story. And what most of us don't realize is from the get-go, Cinderella, she is singing at the very beginning. She is actually happy in the very beginning of the story before she meets the prince, before she has the fairy grandmother show up. She is actually singing. She has fullness before she has this experience that brings her even more, right? So understand this. This is a story about Israel, right? Egypt, they're in the middle of Egypt, right? Think about that moment. They're in this Egypt experience. When they finally learn to sing out, to cry out, the phrase cry out, when they cry out to God, it actually means to sing out, to sing out. And so the original language, to sing, to belt out a song to the Lord, right? That's the thing they do. And so when you can find joy in the midst of pain, you experience deep blessing. Think about this. When they're in the middle of Babylon, if you can learn to thrive in Babylon, you can thrive anywhere. If you can find joy in the middle of pain, brokenness, defeat, imagine what joy looks like on the other side of captivity, right? He's been gaining so many blessings, and there's more to come. This is such a beautiful promise for Israel, right? Even though he's gone through all this, he's about to experience something really difficult. He's got to wrestle with the divine. He's got to show up and have the difficult conversation with brother. But he's already found ways to find joy. Joy is going to be fulfilled very soon. That's the idea for Israel here. It's a really beautiful one. So we'll keep going. Verse 17, pass on ahead of me and make a space between one herd and another herd. Now, this is kind of a nerdy point, but it's a historical one. So the idea here makes sense when you understand like the history of how tribes moved along the desert and open plains. So many of you may not know this, but what they're doing back then is they would actually break a tribe into units. So if you were passing like a large empire, like a Babylonian empire or an Egyptian empire, what you would do if you were a larger tribe is you would actually break your tribe into small units so that when you pass them, you don't look threatening. Interesting, right? You just look like a small little caravan. If you were to come as a whole group, you would show strength. You would be threatening to the empire. Because we know this, beastly empires are threatened when a tiny group shows power, right? When there's a smaller group that shows power, they are threatened by power. And so what Jacob does is really interesting. He does what tribes would have done. They broke them up in order to keep the larger safe, right? It reminds me kind of this of Sun Tzu, The Art of War, right? Let your plans be dark and impenetrable at night. And when you move, fall like a lightning bolt or a thunderbolt, right? The idea, it's sometimes best to hide that power. I love the idea of sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one that holds back their opinions the most until the very end of the conversation, right? The wisdom says, wait, don't show power at first. Don't lord it over others, because oftentimes the weaker one, the one that is threatened by power, they will get scared. They react, right? And so in this moment, Jacob is saying, I'm going to, like Israel, not show this power yet. I'm going to hold it back, right? It will threaten those who are terrified of losing power. It's a really interesting idea here that many tribes who were like larger tribes, they would be very careful not to show their hand yet. It was kind of a war tactic. And so historically, when you would be reading this, yeah, it would make perfect sense. You would think about this moment. Yeah, kind of interesting. Nerdy, I know. Verse 18, and he commanded the first one, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong, and where are you going, and for whom are these things before you? So again, in this moment, he is expecting confrontation, but he wants to come to the table again in a non-threatening way. He doesn't want a power struggle. He's not going into this looking for a fight. right? And I think, again, relationally, what a beautiful idea. And if you are Israel at this moment, when you're facing your enemies, choose to meet them as friends first, right? What an interesting idea for Israel as a nation, but also individually, right? When I have an issue with someone, what if I chose to meet them as friends first? Right? We don't have to meet on the battlefield. We can meet at the coffee table, right? That's the idea here for Jacob. I think it's a really beautiful one. I want to go out. I want to send the peace dove out first before the Roman eagle comes, right? I want to send the peace offering. I want to send out this invitation for a conversation rather than a battle. Continuing on, verse 21. And you shall say, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease his anger with the gift that is going before me. And afterwards I will see his face. Perhaps he will save me. This is a really deep question here, and I like this one a lot. Will the relationship, when they meet for a discussion or an argument or a wrestling match or whatever it is this going to be a relationship in which he's going to be paying a debt? Or is it going to be a familial one where brothers come back together and they join as a family? Or will the one lord power over the other? You owe me this. That's the question we're going to deal with, right? How will the older brother accept him in? Will he accept him, or will the younger brother have to pay a debt, right? I love this quote. This is such a good one. Jacob questions his familial relationship with Esau. His assumption is that there is a price to be paid. He forgets that true family always accepts sons and daughters, brothers and sisters back home. There is no price to be paid when family is concerned. When I read this, I started to think about Jesus and the cross. See, we have this idea Jesus died on a cross in order to pay for the sins, right? Pay for all of the anger that God has toward mankind, right? Many of us, we talked about this in the beginning of this conversation, we sing about these songs, but for many of us, we've outgrown this, right? Augustine's idea of original sin just doesn't measure up anymore. And so we've kind of moved past this. And so here's the thing that many of us have learned. Jesus wasn't paying a price to someone to make things right between the two families. We know that the Romans and the Jews were at odds. There was great tension between the two. And so Jesus is not paying a price to make things right, right? To satisfy God the Father, right? He's not doing that. We know that now. What he's doing when Jesus dies on a cross, remember, both the Jews and the Romans called for his blood. The two groups that were against each other. Think about this. The one thing that unites them in this moment is their hatred toward Jesus. And what does Jesus decide to do? He says, I will take on your hate, your anger. I will bleed for you. I will bleed for these two groups. And after I bleed for these two groups, both sides are going to see that they killed an innocent, right? They killed an innocent one. I did nothing to the two. What it will do, essentially, is it will bring the two together, right? That's the beauty of the cross. When you think about that moment, it actually means so much more, right? It's not a God demanding blood, demanding payment, demanding that Jesus pay a debt. It's Jesus saying, no. These two families have forgotten their family. And sometimes the only way to make them realize that is if someone stands in between them and takes on the punches. That's the idea here. It reminds me so much of Shakespeare. And I know some of you are going to shake your heads for a minute. But there's this beautiful, beautiful play. It's called Romeo and Juliet. It's probably the most famous of all of pieces. But what most people don't understand, it's really the Jesus story all over again. I know, it sounds weird, but think about this. This story is about really during a time period when you had two different religious groups, the Protestants and the Catholics. Shakespeare, what he saw happening was the Protestants and the Catholics, they were warring with one another. They were constantly killing one another on the streets. And the question Shakespeare attempts to address here is, how do I bring the two families together? And so it's really interesting. The Montagues and the Capulets, they look very, very similar in speech, in style, all of it. Even in some of the names used. They made the connections during that time period between the Protestants and the Catholics. The two groups were warring, just like the Montagues and the Capulets, just like the Romans and the Jews. And how do the two families come together? Well, the son and the daughter from both sides, they choose to follow love. And at the end, we have a painful death. We have the death of both of these. And when the two families see the innocent blood of these two spilled, the two families cannot help but come together. They realize we are really one family, right? We are really one family. Why are we fighting in the first place? And that, my friends, is the beautiful story of Jesus. It's really beautiful because the cross is a moment when the Romans and the Jews finally come together. They realize their family, and this is Jacob. Jacob, in this moment, he's still functioning with this idea that blood is going to be needed, right? There's going to be something that's going to be, he doesn't yet realize that like reconciliation is through love and forgiveness. It's through sacrifice, not just giving blood, not violence. It's not going to come through that. It's not going to come through that. It's going to be love, forgiveness. It's going to be the dove. It's going to be the conversation at the table. That's what's going to bring the two together. So good, right? Verse 23, there's a little interesting tidbit here. He arose during that night, and he took his 2 wives and his 2 maidservants and his 11 children, and he crossed the ford of the Jabbok. Now, think about this. If you're a Jewish person, in this moment, he's taking 11 children. You would have said this, well, 11? Why 11? Because normally you would hear the number 12, right? 12 would have been the number of children he's taking, not 11. 11 is close to 12. 12 would have reminded you again of the ancient tribes of Israel, right? 12 is always connected to that. That's why you have the 12 disciples, right? There's all these interesting connections. 12, 12, 12, the 12 tribes of Israel. But there's one missing. There's one missing, and this would have caused, and again, when you read the rabbinical writings, they all make the connection that the writers are saying this to bring up an interesting point here. Who would have been the missing one? Well, for most of them, it would have been the youngest, right? Almost all of the rabbis say he's literally leaving out Benjamin. He's leaving out the 12th son, Benjamin. And so if you know the story of Benjamin, you know that Benjamin is he is the result of a painful birth in which mom dies. Yeah, there's a painful birth. There's a loss. There's brokenness. Benjamin. So think about what the rabbis are saying here. In order for Jacob to truly thrive, he's going to move through some pain. He's going to have a difficult birth experience. Something new is going to happen. But before that, he's going to move through difficulty. This is not going to be easy. And this is why it's setting us up for this wrestling match with the divine. He's going to get some lumps. He's going to walk away with a limp, right? He's going to have to move through these things before he fully faces his brother. It's going to be messy, but afterwards there will be new life again. So good, right? 11 kids. That would have definitely, and it did for the rabbis. They said, whoa, it should be 12. Why not 12? There's one missing, Benjamin. So good. And then it ends with this, of course, verse 24. And he took them and brought them across a stream, and he took across what was his. So again, they make this bold step forward. Before the wrestling match for next week, when we discuss it, they cross the difficult waters, and they're about to face their fears. They're about to face reconciliation. But before that, they're going to go through this wrestling match. It's going to be painful. He's going to leave with a limp. He's going to have to face it. And once he does, he will find reconciliation with his brothers. Yeah, so good. This could be Judah and Israel, right? This could be the Romans and the Jews. This could be the Babylonians and the Jews. You get the idea here. Before you get to reconciliation fully, before you experience freedom, you're going to wrestle with some things, right? Oftentimes it's wrestling with your own stories, your own demons, your own struggles. Once you wrestle with that, then you walk into reconciliation. So good. I told you, there's so much in every one of these verses, right? 9 verses, there's so much to unwrap. So I thought about, what do we do with this? What can we pull from this? I thought about this one. He's about to face some difficulties. And so stepping forward is not easy. And so I thought about, how do we face difficulties with courage, right? For some of us, it's terrifying to face someone. It's terrifying to face problems that have arisen. It's really difficult to face that boss that we're asking for the raise or that we might have an issue with. It's kind of scary to deal with conflict. And so how do we walk into difficulties with some courage? So here's some ideas that I found from some of my favorite writers. And there's mainly just 3 today. So number 1, put all remote possibilities out of your mind. So I like this. Don't worry about things you don't have control over. I'm learning to ask that question lately. What do I actually have control of? Don't spend your time thinking about all the bad things that might happen to you, right? Don't spend your time plotting, planning ways to make sure these things never happen, because if you spend all that energy doing that, it's going to happen, right? That's where you put your energy. Instead, again, think about the things you actually have control over, right? Look at what's in your hands, not what's not in the hand. Consider what you have control over before stepping in. It will enable you to be far more courageous. Number 2, face your fears before the start. So once you face them, I would argue you can move on. So once you've figured out what the worst case scenario could possibly be, you'll see, for that to happen, that would take this, this, and this. I don't have to worry. You begin to have this inner strength that begins to develop. You can say, worst case scenario, this happens. And if that happens, guess what? Life goes on. You lose the job, well, guess what? A lot of people are hiring. Right? If that's the worst case scenario, I'm still alive. I still have breath in me. I'm going to make it. You face the worst case scenario, you're ready for the best to happen. And then lastly, imagine the alternative, right? Picture the result of giving into your fears. Really feel the cost of being ruled by fear. Then really feel the benefits of courageously following your ambition. Right? Carefully weigh the two, see the difference. That's the idea of imagining the alternative. And so those 3 ideas, Timothy Ferriss really delves into this a lot. Those 3 ideas help develop a lot of courage before we really step into the thing. And so, folks, I hope you enjoyed this one. This was fun, and it's a very short section, which is typically kind of skipped over. And so I'm glad today I could even show that even the oddest, shortest little pieces that are often skipped over, there's still something beautiful there if you just take the time to look. So everyone, thank you for joining us. As always, please go to ethos-church.org/donate. We are a nonprofit, so please consider donating and journeying with us as we keep creating more and more content. And if you'd like to join us in live discussions, please consider going to Ethos Living Rooms, where we continue to have these really great conversations. And as always, hit that subscribe button. Join us on YouTube. Everyone, take care. Love ya. We'll see you next week.